So you can start.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to Tamil Heritage Trust's monthly Heritage Talk for March 2022. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. As always, let me quickly introduce THT to those who are new to us. Tamil Heritage Trust was established way back in 2010 with the objective of understanding, appreciating, disseminating, documenting, and celebrating India's rich and varied cultural heritage. Towards this objective, we conduct a number of programs, the principal one among them being this event itself, the monthly Heritage Talks, which have been conducted every month on the first Saturday of the month at 5:30 p.m. for the last 11 plus years. These talks cover a range of topics, and more recently, the last couple of years, we've had speakers from all over the country join us for these talks. The topics include art, architecture, history, epigraphy, prehistory, music, dance, literature, numismatics, the entire range of India's rich heritage. All our talks are available free for all viewers on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Tamil Heritage Trust. You can watch them at your leisure anytime from there are over 150 videos there of all our monthly talks, as well as some of our other events that I'll talk to you about now. We also conduct workshops, some of which have been suspended due to the pandemic, but they're quite popular. We conduct a workshop on how to see a temple, similarly about how to see a museum using the Chennai Egmore Museum as the demonstration piece. We conduct workshops on scripts like Pallava Grantham and so on. We have annual events. The first of them is called the Pechu Kacheri, which coincides with the Kacheri season here in Chennai. Here we deep dive into a specific topic or theme for 2 days, where we have a series of speakers deliver lectures for the public. And our kacheris have included topics like Tamil literature, Srirangam, Pallava Mallai, Kanchipuram, Toraṇa, and most recently we had an online Pechu Kacheri on Kalinga, where we talked about Odisha's rich heritage through its temples, inscriptions, archaeology, and its history on the 8th and 9th of January. Another event that has been popular with our audiences has been a site seminar, where a select set of participants prepare about a certain monument or structures, a set of places for 2 to 3 months, and then visit those monuments and historically important centers, where each of us then becomes both teacher and student during the course of the site seminar, which may be for about a week or so. This is all of us at Sanchi, this is at Tanjavur, and so on. We have held site seminars at Mamallapuram, Ajanta, Srirangam in Gujarat, in Madhya Pradesh, as you saw just now, Kanchipuram in Odisha, in Pattadakkal, Badami, and so on and so forth. And just before the pandemic broke, we even squeezed in one site seminar at Tanjavur and Kumbakonam. We are looking forward to having our next one, hopefully next year. We had an inaugural edition of the Indology Festival, which was entirely online in 2020. And this was a series of talks on a wide range of, eclectic range of topics, both from experts within the country and from overseas. We also had some festive competitions for the public to make it a festival. More recently, we've launched Alamaravai, which is exclusively for teachers, school and college teachers who are happy to take the message of Indian heritage to their students. We try and support them with material, with inputs, with guidance to start heritage clubs and so on. These are teachers who take the message to their students in all over Tamil Nadu, which as of now restricted to Tamil Nadu. The THT Professor S. Swaminathan Heritage Award, named for our co-founder, Professor Swaminathan, is for individuals who not only further research in the area of heritage, but also take the efforts to continuously disseminate heritage. the heritage message. And the last 2 years, the winners are Dr. Madhusudanan Kalaichelavan and Dr. Shankara Narayana. Which brings us to today's talk. I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a distinguished scholar, Dr. Parul Pandya Dhar. We thank her for accepting our invitation so readily and for selecting an excellent topic for today's talk. It's my privilege to introduce her to you. Dr. Parul Pandya Dhar is Professor of Department of History at the University of Delhi. Her work engages with Indian art and architecture, historiography, and the connected histories of South and Southeast Asia. She started off with a graduation in economics from the University of Delhi, and then fascinated by Bharatanatyam, she spent 4 years graduating in performing arts at Kalakshetra in Chennai. She then went on to do an MA with distinction and a PhD in the history of art in the National Museum Institute, New Delhi. In her career, she has been bestowed with a number of awards, which are too many to list in their entirety here, but I'll mention a few of them. The Alexander von Humboldt Postdoctoral Fellowship from Germany, the CAA Getty International Travel Award, USA twice, the Nehru Trust Research Award from the UK, and so on. She has served and continues to serve on editorial committees such as the EFEO Paris and Visual Resources Journal, Taylor and Francis. She's currently writing on issues relating to art and mobility and epic encounters across Indian Ocean, and is also collaborating on a project about visuality and collective memory. Dr. Dhar has authored one book, The Toraṇa in Indian and Southeast Asian Architecture, and has been the editor of several absolutely wonderful volumes on art and art history. The Indian art history, Changing Perspectives, is one of them. The latest is The Multivalence of an Epic, Retelling the Ramayana in South India and Southeast Asia, is her latest book. I'm happy to inform you all of these books are available online at Amazon and other such vendors. She's been the co-editor of a number of volumes as well. Temple Architecture and Imagery of South and Southeast Asia, Asian Encounters, Exploring Connected Histories, as well as the Cultural Interface of India with Asia, Religion, Art, and Architecture. In addition, she contributes to the development and preservation of oral history and audiovisual archives. You can watch her in conversation with Professor M.A. Dhaki at the Sahapedia YouTube site, as well as with Ajay Vajpayee on the Chalukyas of Badami. So it's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to welcome Dr. Parul Pandya Dhar, and I'll now hand it over to her to take us all to the wonderful world of Hoysala sculpture. Over to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you very, very much for this most generous introduction, and good evening, friends. I thank the Tamil Heritage Trust, especially Mr. Shyam Raman and Mr. Badri Sheshadri, for inviting me to speak in this prestigious series. My talk today honors the builders and sculptors of the Hoysala temples at Belur and Halebidu, along with the Keshava temple at Somnathpur in Karnataka. These group of temples have recently been selected for their outstanding universal value as India's nomination for the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites for the year 2022 and 23. So that's my reason for picking up this topic to celebrate this nomination, really. The Hoysala sculptors are renowned for the imaginative intricacy of their carvings. From their vast repertoire, the focus today is on a set of sculptures portraying the episode of Ravana's attempt to lift the mountain abode of Shiva as carved on the walls of the Chennakeshava at Belur and the Hoysaleshwara at Halebidu, both in the Hassan district of Karnataka. Now, in visualizing this well-known theme of Ravananugraha, or the benediction of Ravana, the Hoysala sculptors have artfully concealed a universe of detail. by embellishing their compositions with a microcosm of significant sub-themes within the larger narrative frame, they have created a template that goes well beyond the textual narrations of this divine demonic encounter. The story for me and my association with this depiction on the Hoysala temples began in 2013 during my travel to these exquisitely embellished monuments in the Hassan district of Karnataka. I had at that point then extended my stay to study them better, as I felt particularly drawn to these revelations in miniature. I can still recall the thrill that ran through my limbs as I looked at these sculptures through the zoom lens of my camera. Was I imagining, or was this metaphorical mountain depicted on these sculptures truly concealing such profundity of meaning? As I studied the sculptures further, they began to speak to me at different levels, such as their location, for instance, at the intersection of ethics and aesthetics. Who is a demon? Who is a deity? Who is a divinity? And what is this divine demonic encounter about? A theme that I explored recently in another talk upon the invitation of Professor H.S. Shiva Prakash at the Manipal Center for European Studies. But let me not prolong this prologue, and let us turn to the imaginative artistry of the Hoysala artists right away. Give me half a minute to just upload my presentation. Is it visible now?
It's visible. You can go to the full screen mode.
Okay, now? Fine, all well?
Fine.
Yeah. So, an extraordinary encounter between the great Hindu god Shiva and the mighty demon king Ravana appears as an engaging narrative in ancient Indian literature and art. This mythical episode narrates Ravana's ambitious and arrogant attempt to overthrow Kailash, the Himalayan abode of Shiva, and of the dramatic sequence of events that followed. Disorder prevailed in the divine realm as the mighty Ravana shook the mountain with his many arms. Shiva was quick to restore harmony and crush the demon king's pride. This is the larger narrative, which is very well known, of course. By merely pressing down his toe, the great god brought to bear the weight of the mountain upon the king of demons, who roared in pain, hence Ravana. A penitent Ravana then appeased Shiva for 1,000 years, when the god finally released him and graced him with a boon. This epic mythical encounter between Ravana and Shiva has been portrayed in art as the Ravananugraha Murti, the embodiment of Shiva's grace upon Ravana. Since the middle of the first millennium, artists have visualized it in many imaginative ways, all across India and also Southeast Asia. Sculptors have captured the climactic moments of this narrative through an ingenious tableau-like juxtaposition of scenic and iconic elements, each reinforcing the other in evoking its potent emotive appeal of power, desire, fear, repentance, and ultimately forgiveness. When Shiva and Ravana become the chief protagonists of this epic encounter, it is the environs of the Himalayas that provide an ideal setting to convey the tensions and the links between the divine, earthly, and demonic realms. At one level, the mountainous landscape acts as a towering and seemingly eternal presence that provides a context and bears witness to this theater of the gods and the demons. At another level, the compositional elements that constitute the landscape are imaginatively negotiated by the artist in a manner that renders landscape as an active participant in shaping the encounter and adding fresh levels of meaning. This is especially true of the Hoysala artists, who have envisioned this narrative in a very unique fashion. Among these, the most detailed ones are to be found at Belur and Halebidu. Now, let me first go to the textual imagery of the Meru and Kailash before I then speak about how it has been envisioned on the Hoysala temples. A careful observation of the depiction of Kailash, the mountain abode of Shiva, in Ravana Anugraha compositions at Belur and Halebidu reveal that the qualities usually ascribed to the cosmic mountain Meru have been transposed onto Kailash in these sculptures. Now, Meru as the cosmic mountain at the center of the earth is a recurrent theme in Indian mythology, Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain, and I've just put a representative example of all three here. As the navel of the earth, with its summit as the highest point on earth, it is the axis mundi, connecting heaven and earth. Meru offers a rich conceptual framework for visual elaboration, admirably expressed in much of the sacred art and architecture of South and Southeast Asia. The cosmographical and cosmological imagery of Meru has been elaborated at length in the epics and the Puranas. In some cases, it is also referred to as the seat of Shiva, but rarely. Usually it is Kailash that is referred to as the seat of Shiva. In Puranic cosmography, the Ashtadikpalas, or the 8 regions of the directions, are known to inhabit their cities on mountains surrounding the Meru. Kailash is believed to be one of these mountains surrounding Meru and is located to the south of Meru. Shiva and Kubera are known to dwell on Kailash. Kailash is mentioned several times in the Uttarakanda of the Ramayana and also the Shiva Purana as the site for Ravana's encounters with Shiva. But here, what happens is that Meru is juxtaposed and a whole, a whole cosmic landscape unfolds as a result of this juxtaposition of the two, conveying a range of meanings that are not to be found in other representations. The Hoysala artist's eye for detail is evident in the onrush of forms portraying the mountain abode of Shiva. More careful observation reveals that this is no ordinary mountainous landscape, nor does it seem to be solely a representation of Kailash, as expected in a depiction of the Ravana Anugraha episode. Rather, the mountain appears to assume the qualities of the cosmic mountain Meru. At Chennakeshava, Belur, the symbolism of the mountain as temple and the temple as mountain has been effectively embodied. Landscape and mountain have been conflated as one. The tapering body of the mountain is crowned with a temple's finial resting on the shoulders of the temple mountain. The upper reaches of this temple mountain connect with the heavens or Svargaloka, symbolically by virtue of their proximity to the temple's finial and also by the presence of gods, heavenly musicians, Gandharvas, Apsaras, and other celestial beings emerging in a cloudscape here. By placing Ravan beneath a row of serpents carved under the mountain here, the artist conveys his fate of having sunk to Patalalok or the netherworld by the mere pressing of the toe by Shiva, who resides in the upper reaches along with his consort Uma, the Vrishabha or the bull, and his followers. This central scene. This is Shiva with Uma, Vrishabha, and the retinue. The lokas or the worlds, Bhu, Bhuvaha, Svarga, and then Patala, are layered horizontally and organized hierarchically on the body of this mountain. The mountain demarcates these realms and also connects them even as it bears witness to the unfolding drama between the divine and the demonic. At Hoysala Halebidu, the arrangement of the lokas is similar to that at Chennakeshava, but the Ashtadikpalas dominate there, and I will come to that a little later. Now at Chennakeshava Belur, where we are right now, the Ravana sculpture shows Shiva Loka flanked by Brahma Loka and Vishnu Loka. So the entire triad, the entire divine realm in a cloudscape with all the celestial beings and with the celestial Gandharvas and Apsaras are shown. The Tripurushas, which were very important in this period in Karnataka, are shown here. These abodes correspond with actually their textual descriptions in the upper reaches of Meru. On Kailash, you just have Shiva and Uma. Surrounding these godly realms in the upper reaches of the temple mountain, the artist has detailed a heavenly paradise, carving a profusion of tiny dancers, musicians, adorers, and followers. Now, the lower part of the temple mountain, Bhuloka, is lush with flowering trees, with birds, etc. Here, this part. Amidst this abundant flora, you have human figures, monkeys, and lions. At the base of the mountain is a row of nagas or serpents in the attitude of adoration or Anjali Hasta, which also correspond to textual depictions of the Meru from the Mahabharata. The entire weight of the mountain is borne on the many heads, arms, and shoulders of the mighty Ravan, who is crushed under its weight and kneels. The row of serpents under the mountain indicates Patala. Woven into this rich symbolic composition are other events related to the central theme of the Ravananugraha story. A miniature multi-headed figure with a sword in hand, partially carved here. This is the figure that I'm talking about now, but sufficiently incised to be identified as the multi-headed Ravana, is seen approaching the base of the temple mountain. Presumably, this scene indicates the moment when Ravana had alighted from the Pushpak Viman and was approaching the lower reaches of Kailash with the intention of actually uprooting and overthrowing it. Now, between the Bhulok and the Svargalok, the intermediate zone, the Bhuvarlok, is pictured on the body of the temple mountain here. This space has been effectively used by the artist to portray those encounters between Shiva and Ravana which affirm Ravana's intense devotion towards Shiva. So while the larger frame shows him as the arrogant demon whose pride is crushed by Shiva, the intermediate zone, and interestingly, it really was quite a revelation for me. I think that I should thank my Zoom camera lens and also some amount of persistence on my side, that I saw this entire narrative unfold quite like the Sanchari of a Natya, where within that larger framework, the demon is actually the devout, and what is the ethicality of a demon and what is the ethicality of the divine begins to get questioned. Now, at the extreme right is an image of Ravan playing on the veena. This scene is associated with the aftermath of Ravan's arrogant attempt at lifting Kailash, when a penitent, he becomes here a penitent demon devotee, and he attempts to appease the divine Shiva with hymns in his praise, which he sings on the veena, which he plays on the veena. Now, this intensely devoted and courageous Ravana is said to have used the nerves from his hands to make the strings of the veena and cut off one of his heads to serve as the circular gourd, the tumba or the resonator of the musical instrument. Especially popular in South India, this episode is evoked in some of the Devaram hymns from the Tamil region, and in a few cases, as at the Kailashanath at Kanchipuram, is also portrayed in sculpture. It is portrayed also on some Chola period sculptures. But closer to here, closer to Belur and Halebidu representations, you have a 13th century inscription that tells us more about the courage and devotion of Ravana from Itikala Durga in Karnataka. This inscription speaks of self-contained heroes who step over the 7 oceans and leap over mountain chains, pure warriors, destroyers of enemies, who worship with their heads cut off and play on their arms as the veena, like Ravanas of Kali Yuga. So this Ravana has really risen in estimation, and there is a blurring of what is good and what is evil, what is divine and what is demonic. The act of cutting off the heads mentioned in the inscription is related to yet another courageous expression of Ravana's devotion towards Shiva. You can see him here playing on the veena, and you can see the Shiva Linga here, and the heads are arranged all around the Shiva Linga, 9 heads. And when he tries to cut off his 10th one, that is when Shiva grants him the boon. That entire, it's woven in like a sanchari within the larger frame. But to continue with the Shiva Purana narrative, Ravan, in response to Shiva's offer of a boon, requested the god to allow himself to be carried by Ravan to Lanka. He wanted to carry Shiva to Lanka. And instead, Shiva then offers him the Atma Linga to carry. Here is the episode of Shiva offering Ravana the Atma Linga. In some narratives, in some Sthala Puranas, it is given to a shepherd boy. In some others, it is given to Ganesha, who is depicted here with his trunk and his ears. And the story goes that he is not supposed to place this linga on the floor at any point. If he does, then the linga will get rooted there and he will not be able to carry the Shiva linga to Lanka. As it happens, he has an urgent call and he needs to put the linga down on the ground, and then it gets rooted on the ground. This is how Ravana was tricked by the gods into leaving the linga in the care of a cowherd, or variously in the care of Ganesha. So these 2 episodes are carved here. It is of some interest to recall that the concept of Shiva holding his linga, that is, Shiva with the Atma linga in his hand, is known from earlier traditions and was developed further in the Veerashaiva or Lingayat system of meditation, in which the Ishtalinga is placed on the palm and meditated upon by the followers. The Veerashaiva movement gained popularity from about the 12th, 13th centuries in Karnataka, a time that also coincides with the making of the Belur and Halebidu temple sculptures, and thus offers an interesting parallel. By carving a sequence of images of Ravana, the devotee, in the central portion of the temple mountain, the artist seems to remind the viewer that Ravana's nobler qualities are equally relevant, even as the main narrative of his crushing defeat, which he suffers on account of his arrogance as Ravana the demon, because of his critical failings. So there is this interesting juxtaposition of his contrarian personality, his contrarian character, his nemesis actually, in the Uttarakanda and in the entire Ramayana as the anti-hero. And in the Shiva Purana, of course, he is the ardent demon devotee. Coming to the Hoysala at Halebidu, this composition is broadly similar to the Chennakeshava at Belur. There is the hierarchical division of the mountain in horizontal registers of the Bhu, Bhuvar, and Swarga and Patala Loka. However, the Swarga Loka here is occupied solely by Shiva and Uma. Brahma and Vishnu are missing. So in this aspect, it shows the character of Kailash more than Meru. But then wait, the contradiction sets in almost immediately. At Hoysaleshwar Halebidu, an imposing Ravana kneels under the weight of the mountain. His knee touches the ground. But the Halebidu version is more dynamic and powerful in comparison. The weapons that Ravana holds in his many hands are rendered more forcefully, and his manner of pulling out the sword out of its sheath conveys his combative spirit, even when he finds himself imprisoned under the mountain. The profusion of detail, a hallmark really of Hoysala art, is as much in evidence here. Though the idea of the temple mountain with its finial is absent, although the crowning cornices are available, but the temple finial here is not available. The idea of Meru here is reinforced by the presence of the Ashtadikpalas. Along the periphery of the cosmic mountain, the four Lokapalas, who are the regents of the cardinal directions, Indra, Yama, Varuna, and Kubera. Indra, Yama, Varuna, and Kubera, recognizable by their Vahanas. And each of them has their consort seated alongside. They are positioned at the four corners, while the four other Dikpalas who guard the intermediate quarters, Agni, Nairati, Vayu, and Ishan. So you have Agni, you have Vayu, you have Ishan, and Nairati carved in the intermediate spaces. And near Yama, you have in this forest of Bhuloka, dead bodies, because Yama is the god of death. The cities, etc., are mentioned. It's a very detailed textual iconography. And obviously, the makers were guided by these textual iconographies to recreate this entire Meru iconography on what is supposed to be Kailash. Now, between the earthly realm and the heavens, in the central part of the mountain, one can observe two distinct cameos amidst a profusion of figures. One, Ravana offering his heads to the linga, and Ravana, then second, entrusting the linga to his figure. Both these narratives are from the Shiva Purana, as discussed in the context also of the Chennakeshava at Belur. So here is the linga, and here are the heads arranged around the linga. Here is Shiva offering his Atma Linga to Ravana. Just above these images, a conspicuous figure stands in a posture that suggests agitated movement. It is not possible to decisively identify him, but if the representation continues some later version of the Shiva Purana narrative, then he could be Ravan, who is said to have attempted to uproot the linga after it got rooted to the ground. Beneath the figures of Shiva and Uma are 7 caves, which suggests the presence of the 7 sages or the Saptarishis. So there is an entire cosmology unfolding here. Let me now come to an additional Ravana sculpture preceding these two to try and understand how the artists evolved such a profoundly textual, metaphysical, religious, template, detailing it out, because none of the others, right up to the Kashi Vishweshwara at Lakundi, you do not find this kind of a template. But I did manage to locate one pre-Hoysala template for the Ravan Anugraha Murti, and it is a miniature representation really, which is carved on the Vedika or the blind railing or enclosure of the common dance and music hall or Rangamandapa of the new Trikuteshwara temple at Gadag, built towards the end of the later Chalukyan rule in Karnataka. A kneeling Ravan is visible, crushing under the weight of the mountain. Again, the knees are touching the ground. The base of the mountain is made up of rocks, as was the convention for this composition in the late Chalukyan period. Yet, at the new Trikuteshwara temple at Gadag, the depiction of Kailash is in the image of a temple mountain, quite clearly, with a Dravidian Shikhara or cupola and a stupi. An innovation that marks a departure from other late Chalukyan representations. And just to show you what the parallel late Chalukyan representations were like, here is one from Kashi Vishweshwara at Lakundi, a regular mountain with rishis, lions in caves, animals, and with Shiva and Uma seated atop, and a kneeling Rava. But there is no such cosmographical, cosmological, deeply profound meaning that you attach to Meru in right up to Kashi Vishweshwara in Lakundi. You do start finding some kind of a presaging of what then the Hoysala sculptors evolved at Gadag in Trikuteshwara, which is of late Chalukyan, just preceding the Hoysala. Late Chalukyan artists are known to have migrated further southwards to the Hoysala heartland during the 12th century. The identity of at least one such late Chalukyan artist, Nagoja, is known by inscriptions, and he worked on the Trikuteshwara at Gadag and then later moved to Belur and possibly worked at the Chennakeshava in Belur. Such developments, such migrations of artists naturally led to a sharing of artistic vocabulary and style, as may be noticed in the later Chalukyan and Hoysala monuments. There is also a second example, which I have not illustrated here, a miniature representation carved on the Vedika of the hall of the Chennakeshava temple at Belur. The architectural context of this sculpture is remarkably similar to the one at Trikuteshwara Gadag, and that adds to the possibility of the connections that I was drawing from inscriptions of artists migrating from later Chalukya lands to Hoysala lands. There too, a kneeling Ravan is crushed under the weight of a temple mountain, but in that case, it is a northern Indian temple, which really doesn't matter because you have all sorts of temple forms depicted on the Chalukyan and Hoysala monuments. The template for the Hoysala Ravana Anugraha images clearly evolved sometime during the mid-11th century, towards the end of late Chalukyan rule. The example from Trikuteshwara temple complex in Gadag provides a vital link in this transition. The Hoysala artists, with their love for detail, developed this basic format further and gave expression to a remarkable visual composition of the Ravana Anugraha narrative by embellishing their creations with a microcosm of significant details. They evolved a unique template which extended far beyond a visual translation of Ravana's attempt to overthrow Shiva's abode, as mentioned in the texts. Through an informed and creative engagement with the larger context within which this divine demonic encounter needs to be understood, the sculptors at Belur and Halebidu succeeded in visualizing and echoing, usko ek tarah se dhvanit kar diya, the multiple levels of meaning that this mythical episode carries, really, completely afresh in a manner that resonates with the totality of its associated meanings. So that's where I would like to conclude, so that I can take on any questions or any discussion that might interest the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dhar. There are obviously this is an interesting thesis and evolution of the way this particular Ravana Anugraha Murti has happened over time, over space, over different locations. I've been to Belur, Halebidu, and I've seen all of this, but I didn't really look that carefully to check out all these minor details. I thought they were, like the characteristic hallmark of the Hoysala architecture. There's just too many embellishments, compared to the typical Pallava or Chola, very, very light touched sculptures. They looked too ornamental. That was my first reaction. Some of the ones that I have seen, and I would like to take off from there and ask you some questions, is that the initial focus of at least the Pallava one, in the earliest Pallava that we can look at is in one of the temples in Mamallapuram.
Yeah, Olakaneshwar. Yes.
The focus is on just three things, right? The hillock or Kailash, Mount Kailash.
Yes.
Of course, the Shiva and Parvati. Others may be depicted, but they are too small or insignificant. And then Ravana. Ravana is the hero in terms of the space given, in terms of the effort undertaken to lift that massive mountain, and the fear that is shown in Uma of uprooting of a mountain, causing her to lose balance, and the complete calm and sereneness that Shiva personifies, because he knows what is going on and he knows how to deal with it. Just these are the main, the character study, nothing more. If you go to Ellora, you can see the Kailash is a little more elaborate, but nowhere near what you see in the Hoysala architecture, Hoysala sculpture presentation. So when does the Kailash become Meru? They are different, right? Obviously, right? And the whole representation of universe. So Kailash to Meru to bringing Vaikuntha and Satyaloka and everything else. And what is the scriptural support for something like that?
Okay. So thank you very much. So there are multiple discussion points in your very fine observations. So let me first begin with the Pallava examples that you took, and then move from there to this whole idea of the juxtaposition of Meru with Kailash, which is really quite phenomenal and unique to these Hoysala expressions. So to begin with the Pallavas, in almost when I say South, I'm including the Deccan. You find a huge difference in the way that this iconography is visualized north of the Deccan, and how it is visualized in the Deccan and the South. Now, I am not going to hazard a rationale for it, but certainly Ravana's heroic character is far more emphasized in the Deccan and the South. And you find, for example, at the Virupaksha Patadakku, where you have a very fine Ravana on the southern porch pillar of the Virupaksha, excellent one, and you have the entire depiction as you just described, or as I had narrated earlier, and on the side you have a figure seated and as though writing something, writing down something. This is 8th century, and I've often tried to think about the way that the Anugraha Murtis are shown in the Devaram of the Tamil region, where the aspect of benediction, there are different Anugraha Murtis, and you have Ravana Anugraha as an extremely important imagery there. And the whole idea of receiving benediction from Shiva. So anybody, a demon, somebody of the lower caste, somebody who is a thug or a robber or anybody, that whole idea of bhakti or of complete surrender is what becomes important. And that is what is then emphasized not only in the Devaram hymns, but also in the Sthala Puranas and in the Shiva Mahapurana, that he is willing to cut off all his heads. He is willing to undergo any kind of austerity to gain benediction from Shiva. So he is that complete surrender can lead to the personal God whom you worship in the bhakti setup. That emphasis you find not only in the Hoysala temple sculptures, but also in the Kailashanath at Kanchipuram, where Valerie Gillett has identified, and I'm sure other scholars have identified, a sculpture where he pulls out the veins from his hands and prepares the veena, and uses one of the heads as the tumba or the resonator of the veena,
right,
and then sings the saman. So that is that he is giving all of himself to the Lord, a complete surrender to the Lord. And that I found also in Ellora. In one of the Kalachuri sculptures also in up north, you have it. So wherever Pashupata Shaivism or different the Kalamukhas, then the Shiva Siddhantas, and where you have Shiva Bhakti emphasized, Ravana is projected as an ideal devotee.
Right.
And now that over here, also this whole thing of the Atma Linga you have in Ellora. You also have it in some of the southern sculptures. Shiva carries it on his shoulder or in his hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the Atmalinga is given where he wants to carry it to Lanka. Now that idea of the Atmalinga and the Ishtalinga of the Lingayat Veerashaiva movement seem to find a close parallel. And that is something that may have inspired the Hoysala sculptors to elaborate on the episode of this Gokarna and Atmalinga, and that whole episode is then treated like a sanchari within the larger frame of this battle between the divine and the demon.
Right.
But nowhere do you have such a fascinating elaboration as you have on these Hoysala movements. And that, I think, we have to find the reason in the technicality also of the stone that is used. So if you have a very hard granite for the Pallavas, whereas you have this, freshly excavated schist that is used in the Hoysala regions is soft, and it can be chiseled to defy stone, actually chiseled like you're carving on soap.
Yeah.
And that kind of I think that Hoysala art, which is now nominated for UNESCO by India, it's India's entry this time. I think it offers a possibility to think in terms of, like you have miniature paintings. So you're able to think of miniatures in stone. And that truth, you can say the devil resides in the details, but you can also say that God resides in the details. So the truth is in the details. And I think that is a very fascinating contribution of the Hoysala artists. I hope I have covered all the ground that
there are more questions.
Okay.
But one of the points that, taking off on what you just now said of the opportunity that the Hoysala period sculptors had, because they had a medium which they could see. These are actually speaking not even the main sculpture, right? The when you enter the temple,
this is just
on the side, right?
Just on, and can you just think about? I mean, I was actually just trying to get a good view through my camera,
right?
And I mean, my first thing that I noticed was on the Hoysaleshwara at Halebidu. I was focusing and I said, who are these animals and riders on the side?
Right.
So, just I was trying to get every detail in. And then I gradually realized that these are the Ashtadikpalas. So what on earth is going on here? And then I started thinking that, is this the Meru that they are showing? Because, by creating this matrix of the 8, who are the Ashtadikpalas, they are just symbols. They're the symbols of all the directions.
Right.
So the eight directions, the 4 cardinal directions, and then the intermediate direction, that is horizontally and vertically. And then you have all the lokas organized horizontally.
Right.
So what is happening here? You are creating a kind of a charged space that actually represents in the microcosm. The entire manifestation has to fit into it.
Right.
And residing right on top of that Meru is Shiva.
Right.
So essentially, by uprooting that cosmic mountain, Ravana is challenging Rita, or the cosmic order, which Shiva then tries to restore.
Okay.
So I mean, this is very interesting. The whole. I think it does require a very text-based, heavy interpretation, but at the end of it, I think what the artists have imaginatively done is that they have conveyed a profundity of meaning, and at the same time brought in the local understandings of the sympathetic treatment of Ravana, which was so prevalent in the 12th, 13th centuries in the region.
I'll revisit this one. There are a couple of questions which I'll present. One from V.K. Srinivasan. It says, mind-boggling details, surely a universe of details. Can we understand this piece of art as an artistic challenge and response to the Pallava masterpiece of Mamallapuram, the Arjuna Bhagirath penance panel, which on a much larger surface presents again hundreds of characters. There are again multiple interpretations, but you would see from one end to the other end just too many things happening there. I don't know whether artists were trying to respond and taking up challenges, but how do you look at this question?
Okay, so that great penance relief at Mamallapuram is an absolute masterpiece, and the scale is just not comparable to these Hoysala pieces.
Right.
These Hoysala pieces, I mean, the Mamallapuram great penance relief, which is again full of again you have all sorts of figures of speech, arthalankaras and shabdalankaras there. So you have the metaphor, you have the simile, you have the double entendre, shlesha, rupaka, virodhabhasa. The artist has actually visualized the verbal ornament of the poetic traditions, and its whole scale at Mamallapuram is huge. So it's the centerpiece, and it is possible in granite to carve it only in that large scale.
That scale.
Yeah?
That's correct.
Whereas what is happening in Halebidu and Belur is actually this mind-boggling detail is in a relatively very small piece.
Right.
So you could compare just the elephants of that great penance. One of the largest elephants.
Right. Right.
That's the size of the entire piece. So imagine that universe of
actually even smaller than that.
Yes.
You really look at.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the whole approach is.
But ignore the size. It's rather the composition and the number of characters and the storytelling. In that sense, basically.
In that sense, yes. In that sense, yes.
And the details. So it is actually worthwhile to there are some scholars who have counted and enumerated in the Great Penance panel every single character. I think it's worthwhile. I don't know whether something similar has been done to that fine detail of every single microscopic detail of these Hoysala panels.
They have just there's one published paper on it.
Okay.
Written by me. And I'm elaborating it for another publication. But given that the space is so limited, the quality of carving of these details is not comparable to the quality of the sculptures at the Mamallapuram Great Penance Relief. It's more like, you see, from a distance, it just looks like a mountain carved with a whole lot of, probably only when you peer in. And the best part is that it's not at eye level. I'm sure you've been to Belur and Halebidu. It isn't at eye level. You have to look up.
Right.
You have to look up, and then how are you going to see all this?
Right.
You can only see it through a zoom lens.
Correct.
So that's about it.
Okay. So there is a question from Arvind Iyer. In fact, he has two questions. Considering the representation of the mountain as a temple, do we know if the Ravana Grahamurti panels were treated more like icons for worship than other panels representing Purana episodes? So is it a narrative storytelling panel or an icon of worship?
No, I think it is a narrative. It is a narrative. And the temple as mountain is also treated very differently in all the places. So if you see it in Cambodia, Bante Sri. Bante Sri has this episode, 10th century, 961 AD, on one of the pediments. And there they have done this stepped pyramid. And they have copied their own temple mountains as they were done in Cambodia. So no, I don't think it is an icon of worship. I think it is a narrative panel. It is iconic as far as Ravana Anugraha Murti is concerned. But within the icon, the narrative unfolds. And also because the Deccan artists were so well versed in different temple forms. So they loved to make the Nagara, Bhumija, Dravida, Karnata Dravida, Tamil Dravida, all of them to show and that Kuppatur, the Kuppatur temple inscription tells you about, the different forms of the temple. So they loved to decorate their temple walls to show off the knowledge of the various temple forms that they knew.
Yeah, these are completely lacking in the Tamil Nadu region, where the niche, the Kosta, at most will have a Toraṇa as an embellishment on top of it, right? And an icon is basically inserted into the existing Kosta, nothing more. In the later Chola versions, you start seeing the related, narrations on the sides, like the Tanjavur Veridishwara temple or the Gangakonda Cholapuram temple, or even many other smaller temples. The Kosta sculpture is sort of worshipping icon in a sense, but then there are the leading to the story and post the story, other characters or the actual sequence itself will be present. Say, for example, if it is in Gangakonda Cholapuram, the Chandesa Anugraha Murti, the backstory of Chandesa will be depicted in very, very, very small little side panels, basically. Right? But here, it's integral. It is not differentiated from the larger block. So everything is together. So the the very, very large block or the mountain that Ravana is lifting also has Ravana showing his heads, or Ravana carrying the linga, Ravana playing the veena. Everything is basically part of one large block, effectively. Right? So this is where Arvind here has another question. Is the representation of recent past events by indistinct carvings, like the approach of Ravana before shaking Kailasa, shown in Belur, a technique often used in Hoysala story panels as well?
I didn't get it.
I think, it's sort of based on what I'm saying, he's just stretching that. I think is this of the sequence of events, though the main depiction is something. Then you also have Ravana approaching the mountain, Ravana playing the veena, Ravana, submitting his heads, Ravana carrying a linga. So all of this is this storytelling technique, often used in Hoysala panels. He wants to know, by looking at all the Hoysala panels, is this the technique that we are following?
I think that when you look at those registers on the Pitha, the Pitha of these temples are very elaborate in registers. So on the Narapitha, you see, you have the Ashva Pitha, you have the Grasa Pitha, you have the various levels of the base, and then you have the Narapitha that actually comes at the islet. And then on that Narapitha, you have the Bhagavata, the Ramayana, and the Mahabharata proceeding. And there the narrative is a continuous sequential narrative. Whereas what is happening here is quite like you have a larger episode. So let's say there is an Ashtapadi in Sringara Rasa, and the whole and the Naika is let's say, fighting with the Nayak. Let's say Radha is arguing or fighting Khandita. And within it, you have a reminiscence. You have a reminiscence of happier times, or you have a reminiscence of erotics, or you have a reminiscence of the pleasant breeze, or you have a sanchari of jealousy woven into it as vyabhichari bhavas, as transient states. And so I would tend to think of this technique of narration as something that also happened in the performative traditions, where you have the larger episode of this divine demonic encounter, but within it are multiple levels of meaning. Within it is this whole idea that this, let's say, this love between Radha and Krishna is a Leela that is being enacted. This divine demonic encounter is the larger format of the victory of good over evil. And within it, but there are so many gray areas, there are so many colors, there are so many transient states, that there is no black reserved for Ravana and white reserved for the divinity. So I tend to think of this particular type of narration through a performative text.
Okay.
Just another provocation that
you come from a strong dance tradition that you are seeing it in that sense, but the storytelling traditions, right? Probably even in the storytelling tradition, you keep sort of branching out into other stories and then come back to the main story, right? So in a sense, most of us are primarily used to reading large Puranic.
Yes, sure. The Mahakavya is like that. There are so many plots and subplots within the larger.
Okay. Yeah. There's a question from Utpal Dev. A truly detailed study of a single panel. I listened to your narrative, fascinated. What about other sculptures at Halebidu and Belur? There must be many more stories depicted there.
Absolutely.
Shows that it's a very
absolutely. I agree. Yes, tell me.
And he also says, could you elaborate a bit on those? I realize it's a huge task. Please touch on the important ones. I don't know whether you have the time to really go into that.
We need the images, but let me narrate a small. Panel just for the sake of it. So I wrote my book on the Toraṇa long back, and so for that I had documented also the Hoysala, the ones at Halebidu and Belur particularly, and I had taken again similar zoom photographs for it. And I noticed that the Tripurushas and the Dikpalas actually are always positioned in a way as to create a semblance of, bringing in one that compositional space, the entire manifestation. And then it is within that entire sort of universe, a mini universe, micro universe created, the microcosm, that a particular event then unfolds. So if you have, for example, the dancing Natasha, so with the beat, what the mridang players still use, ta, ti, tom, nam, that cosmic nad, that is with that sound, the creation manifests.
Right.
And so you have the dancing Natasha in the center, the Dikpalas and the Tripurushas. And also, in the Hoysala sculptures, as in the legacy of the early Western Chalukyas and to some extent the later Chalukyas also, the artists were very, very much more upfront about leaving their signatures and messages behind. And so this particular one that I just described is also having the signature of an artist who traces his lineage, who compares himself to the other sculptors, that he says he is the Vajragiri Danda. That he crushes, is the Vajra that crushes the mountainous ego of his rival competitor artists. And that he is the one who has been appointed by his guru. That is another master sculptor or architect, to work for the king. And it is that pride that he will maintain. So, yes, the Hoysala temples, there's still much more that can unfold. So this was what should I say, a chance discovery for me that I pursued. And I think there are rich dividends for others to pursue as well.
There's a question from Anand. Could you please elaborate on the political and ethical interpretation of Ravana Anugraha panel being placed in the temple? What did it signify beyond the Puranic episode?
So, I will not over-interpret this, in the sense that this is, you also have to see the architectural context of the panel. It is just on one side of the temple. It's just one of the sculptures. But there is a political message there is a political metaphor in the Ravana. And you get a lot of inscriptions that talk about Padam Bhuja Mukuta Chumbitasya, and all of these inscriptions that you get. Also, say the Ganga ruler will talk of the Pallava Ganga ruler, who is an ally of the Chalukyas, will talk of the Pallava ruler as Ravana on earth, and whose pride is to be crushed, or whose pride could not be crushed. So that whole divine demonic encounter in a political dynastic context then becomes the king and the enemy, and that kind of an extension of the epic into the political sphere is happening all the time.
Okay, there is if you take Ellora, right, in a sense, every single cave, their attempt is to sort of recreate Kailasha. As why you see Ravana Anugraha and Shiva and Parvati playing dice, it just repeats.
Yes, it does.
But with hundreds of variations. Variation more in the sculptural presence. There may not be new themes introduced, but these are repeating again and again and again, cave after cave after cave, and the central massive Kailashanatha temple, the monolith, right? Whereas when it comes to the Hoysala temple, this is not the main theme.
No.
So the purpose is general presentation of all manifestations of Shiva,
yes,
or Vishnu, and every square inch has to be somehow covered. Right? So this is one among the many
absolutely
stories.
Absolutely.
But even then, the effort that has gone into, so this is despite the fact that this is not the main theme, and the fact that it is placed, as you say, just somewhere and not at eye level, not given primacy of position, so much has been put into that, shows that they were not taking anything lightly.
Not at all.
The total devotion to the presentation of that story really comes out
yes,
beautifully there. I want to go back to the Tevaram, some of the Tevaram verses, and the Pashupata cult, which combines with the question that Arvind Shetty has. Could you please say a little more about the correspondence between the specific Shaivite sects and how they are depicted to the iconography of Ravana Anugraha?
No, the visual domain does not give you so much of specificity to start comparing different, say, so you start getting the Ravana Anugraha in a Pashupata context early on, Elephanta, you have Ellora, you have Patadakal, Rakulisha Pashupata, Vasundhara Filioze has done a book on it. The Kalamukhas, the Shaiva Siddhantins. This imagery is part of it, part of Kalyana Sundara, Gangadhara, Lakulisha. You have all of them depicted at Elephanta, and there is a certain organization, configuration of that imagery. But you do not have so many, you do not have the kind of data that you need to work out that whether the Pashupata represents it differently from. This particular one at Belur is actually in a Vaishnav context. And the only difference that you see is that you have the three Purushas depicted clearly on the mountain because they wanted Vishnu present there. Whereas in Hoysaleshwar, which is a Shaiva temple, they do away with Brahma and Vishnu.
No, the part of the reason is that, I mean, if you really look at the set of the Nayanmars and the stories related to them, Periya Puranam and even well before that, which sort of is your Tevaram and other related songs. One of the themes that repeat is the extreme stress that is brought on the devotee by Shiva, and then he then gives his benediction. So the process of, I mean, whether it is Sirutondar who has to cook his little child food, to or Kanappar having to completely remove his eyes, or Iyarpagai who has to kill all his wife's relatives just because Shiva asked for his wife. That extremity. It's not. It's not that the devotee is under stress by others.
Yes.
And then the God comes to rescue them.
So extreme test of devotion. Extreme test of devotion.
That you can see in this
extreme surrender.
Yeah, and Ravana Anugraha is sort of extension of it.
Yes.
Not in the initial portion of him lifting with all his that valor and power and ability. The real part, which I think caters to the Shiva Bhaktas, is that he is ready to pluck each of his heads.
Yes.
One after the other.
Yes.
Not really for a minute even thinking about what will happen to him.
Yes.
To pluck his nerves to build a Veena.
Yes.
And the extreme pain that he is willing to.
So that is the ultimate level of surrender.
Right.
Of complete self-destruction, whether it is cooking the child for a meal,
right,
or whether it is pulling off your own heads one by one. Alf Haltebeetle has done this fantastic book on criminal gods and demon devotees, where he deals with this subject in a very fine manner. So yes, I agree.
So that's that sect of whether that is I don't know whether that was driven by this Pashupata thinking or the Kapalikas or Kalamukas. I don't know enough to basically relate that, but you can clearly see that much before the Virasaiva sect, which was not really this extreme, compared to the Tamil Shaivism of the Tevaram, post-Tevaram period, basically, which was fairly extreme to create these stories, the Periya Puranam stories.
Yes.
Now, this is the correlation that you can really see of that extremity.
Yes.
which
yes.
then has become popular enough. I know, I mean, it's a pan-Indian idea, this Ravananugraha depiction, but who
But
influenced
the drama really unfolds in the south and the Deccan, because in the north, the Ravananugraha, it is Shiva and Parvati who occupy most
Correct.
of the space,
correct,
and
correct.
Ravana is a footnote on the
Yes.
pedestal.
Yes.
So this whole drama is unfolding Deccan and southwards. Yeah. Can we
Fascinating.
take one last question?
Yeah, I think we are pretty much done.
We are
There are a lot of appreciation messages. So yes, it
Thank
was
you so
really
much.
fascinating. Thank you for a wonderful lecture, and I'm pretty sure this has kindled interest amongst a lot of people to probably go and leave out everything and go and stand in front of in Belur and Halebidu the Ravananugraha Murti and spend a lot of time.
Well, now that Omicron has given us some respite, we should all travel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Most welcome, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, and we will meet again next month. First